what's going on for what many in the United States may never have heard of in Manus Island.
The description that this is the Pacific's Guantánamo is apt. As an Australian, I feel a moral obligation to stand up and say, not in my name. The Australian government is indefinitely detaining asylum seekers, sending them to conditions that the UN has found to amount to inhuman and degrading treatment in breach of our international obligations. Consecutive Australian governments on both sides of the political divide have continued this practice, and it's time that Australians stand up and say, enough, this is enough.
But could you explain, what is the status of Manus Island? Why does Australia keep potential asylum seekers in detention there?
Australia intercepts people arriving by boat seeking asylum in Australia. They are insisting on their international right to seek asylum. Australia is concerned about the number of asylum seekers coming to Australia and is therefore intercepting them, sending them to PNG for process and resettlement there, so they'll never get to Australia. This is in clear breach of our international obligations.
Alex, explain who these asylum seekers are. How many are packed into this prison? What's their response in Australia?
There's over 1,000 people currently being detained at the Manus Island Detention Centre. We've got people there from Syria, Sri Lanka, Pakistan, Afghanistan, Somalia, and these people have been in there. Some people have been in there for up to 18 months. It's indefinite detention. They don't know when they're going to be processed. In fact, there's been no one that's been processed and resettled. So this latest protest is in response to the idea that they're going to be resettled in Papua New Guinea. Among some of the detainees, we know that there are people who are homosexual who've actually fled their home countries because of persecution, and now they're very frightened of being resettled in Papua New Guinea where homosexuality is illegal. There's been huge conflicts between PNG locals and detainees, and we're just seeing that it's been ongoing violence, a huge number of incidents of self-harm, hunger striking.
How long are people held?
It's indefinite. In some detention centres in Australia, we have some other offshore and onshore detention centres. There's people who've been in there for up to 4 years.
And evidence of the hunger strike going on?
The hunger strike is still continuing. The Australian government is saying that the hunger strike is over, but we've been seeing images today, and I've had messages from advocates and people inside today saying it's continuing within the compounds.
And Alex, you mentioned the conflict between the locals, PNG locals, and the detainees. Could you explain what happened? There have been 2 detainees who've been killed or who died within that detention facility at Manus Island. What happened to Reza Barati, his name is?
Yes, there's been ongoing tensions since the detention centre was established. Manus Island, a lot of the community there are living in poverty, and it appears that there's been a lot of incitement of the tensions from people operating the centre, so spreading rumours within and without about the tensions. But last February there was a tragic incident where there was guards attacked detainees, and there was one detainee who died. We still haven't actually seen any prosecutions in response to the death of Reza Barati. There's been 2 people arrested, but there's allegations that Australians were involved.
Jennifer Robinson, you're an international human rights attorney. What's the law here? You've been to PNG, you've been to this area.
I've been to PNG and I've spent times in West Papua and refugee settlement camps, so I can speak with first-hand experience that PNG is not a state that is capable of accepting our asylum seekers and refugees. 90% of these people who come by boat to Australia have been determined to be refugees in the past. The conditions in PNG are terrible. It is unlawful for Australia to be continuing to send asylum seekers to conditions the UN has found to amount to inhuman and degrading treatment. We are in breach of our international obligations. The problem is enforcement. Australia's domestic law, the High Court of Australia, has continually found that offshore detention is permitted under the terms of Australian law. When we had the Malaysian solution under the Gillard government, it was challenged before the High Court and found to be inappropriate because we had a provision in our law that you couldn't send asylum seekers to a country that didn't meet certain human rights standards. In response to that, the Australian government amended that to remove that from our domestic law, which means we are no longer constrained, and they upheld the constitutionality of offshore processing. This is a clear breach of our international obligations, but what we can do as a matter of law within Australia's courts is limited.